You have 13 minutes. 13 minutes is how long it took from the moment the roof of Aloha flight tore away. Open to the sky at feet. To the moment the wheels touched the runway. 13 minutes for 2 pilots to land a plane with no roof. 1 engine. And mile-per-hour winds tearing through the cabin. 13 minutes for a flight attendant with no shoes to crawl the length of a broken aircraft. Holding her unconscious colleague's hand. So she wouldn't die alone. 13 minutes for people to decide whether they believed in miracles. And 13 minutes. Not 1 second more. For Clarabelle Lansing to realize what was about to happen. She didn't get even that. The route from Hilo to Honolulu was minutes. 35 minutes. Barely enough time to finish a cup of coffee. The crew had already flown this exact route multiple times that day. The pilots had done it so many times they could fly it half asleep. The skies were clear. The sun was shining. 90 passengers settled into their seats. Buckled up. And thought about nothing except what they were having for dinner that night. Nobody was afraid. Nobody had any reason to be. In the cockpit sat Captain Robert Skornsteimer. Years old. Calm, experienced. The kind of pilot who made you forget you were hurtling through the sky in a metal tube. Beside him, First Officer Madeline "Mimi" Tompkins. Sharp, skilled. The one flying the plane that afternoon. And in the cabin. 3 flight attendants. Jane Sato Tomita. Working near the front. Michelle Honda. Near the back. And Clarabelle. Sweet, devoted, year-old Clarabelle. Walking down the aisle at row 5. Tray in hand. Smiling at a passenger who was about to reach out and take a drink. The plane was at feet. Everything was perfect. Mimi Tompkins heard a sound she had never heard in her entire career. It wasn't a bang. It wasn't a warning alarm. It was something far worse. A violent, tearing whoosh. Like the sky itself had reached into the plane and grabbed something. And then the world came apart. An foot section of the roof. The entire top of the fuselage from just behind the cockpit to the wing. Was simply gone. Ripped away. Swallowed by the sky in a fraction of a second. One moment there was a ceiling above the first 5 rows of passengers. The next moment. Nothing. Just open sky. Blue and vast and merciless. 300-mile-per-hour winds tore through the cabin like a living thing. Insulation, paper, debris. Everything became a weapon. The noise was so deafening that human voices became useless. Passengers were pinned to their seats by the force of the wind. Unable to move. Unable to scream loud enough to be heard. Captain Skornsteimer felt the plane roll violently. He grabbed the controls. They felt loose, wrong, broken. He turned around in his seat. And he saw blue sky where the ceiling used to be. He would later say it was the most terrifying moment of his life. And this was a man who had seen a lot. In the back of the cabin, Michelle Honda was thrown off her feet. She hit the floor hard. The wind was overwhelming. A white blur of debris and chaos. Like being inside a blizzard. She later described it. There was a smoke-like vapor in all the debris flying around. Paper, fiberglass. It was kind of white. That's why I say blizzard. Although it wasn't cold. She couldn't stand. She couldn't see. The wind was trying to pull her toward the open sky. So she did the only thing she could do. She grabbed the metal bars underneath the passenger seats. The ones nobody ever notices. The ones nobody ever thinks about. And she held on. With everything she had. She crawled forward on her hands and knees. Inch by inch. The debris cutting into her skin. Her shoes long gone. Blown off by the blast. Jane Sato Tomita had been hit on the head. She was unconscious. Bleeding. Collapsed on the floor of the aisle. Michelle found her. She lay down beside her. She took her hand. She held it. That's what she did during the worst minutes of her life. She held her colleague's hand so she wouldn't be alone. But Clarabelle. Nobody could find Clarabelle. Because Clarabelle wasn't there anymore. She had been at row 5. Handing a passenger a drink. When the roof tore away. She was standing. Unbelted. Exposed. The sky took her instantly. 1 second she was there. Smiling. Working. Doing the job she had loved for years. And the next second she was simply gone. Not injured. Not fallen. Gone. Swept out of the aircraft at feet over the Pacific Ocean. At miles per hour. The Coast Guard searched for 3 days. They found nothing. Her body was never recovered. The passenger she had been handing that drink to. They survived. They were belted in. They lived. She didn't. That is the cruelest detail of this entire story. The most devoted person on that plane. The woman who had given her entire career to keeping passengers safe. She was the only one who couldn't save herself. In the cockpit, Skornsteimer and Mimi were fighting for the lives of people. With a plane that had no business still being in the air. The noise was catastrophic. They couldn't hear each other speak. They used hand signals. Like people drowning. Trying to communicate through the chaos. Skornsteimer made a decision instantly. Emergency descent. Divert to Kahului Airport on Maui. The closest runway. They had to get this broken, bleeding plane on the ground. But to reach Kahului, they had to fly over mountains. And then, the left engine failed. Debris from the explosion had been sucked into the engine. And destroyed it from the inside. One engine. No roof. mph winds. Mountains below. 90 people who wanted to go home. Passengers later described the horror of those minutes. Wires hanging loose everywhere. Sparking. One man said he thought he was being electrocuted. I really thought I was being burned alive, he said. And yet. Not one passenger unbuckled their seatbelt. Because they were all too terrified to move. Meanwhile, Michelle Honda. Shoeless. Bleeding. With debris cutting into her hands. Was still crawling up that aisle. Still doing her job. Still checking on passengers. Still trying to keep people as calm as humanly possible. When the sky had literally opened above their heads. She is one of the bravest human beings in aviation history. And most people have never heard her name. From the moment the roof disappeared to the moment the wheels touched the ground. 13 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. A controller at Kahului Airport saw the plane approaching on radar. And looked up. What he saw made him go cold. The looked, in one reporter's words. Like a seal after a shark attack. A massive section simply missing. Wires trailing. The fuselage open to the sky. Wings damaged. One engine dead. He got on the radio. His voice was steady. Because that was his job. To be steady. Aloha 243. Just for your information. The gear appears down. That was the only good news he had. But in that moment. It was everything. In the cabin. Passengers were counting. Not seconds. They were too frightened for that. They were just existing. One heartbeat at a time. Trusting two pilots they had never met. To bring them home. Skornsteimer knew one thing above everything else. The landing had to be gentle. If the nose gear hit hard. If there was any violent impact. The already compromised front section of the plane could tear away entirely. Everyone in the first rows would die instantly. So he had to land a crippled, one-engined, roofless Boeing. In a crosswind. On a runway he'd been diverted to under emergency conditions. Gently. At p.m. Exactly 13 minutes after the sky took Clarabelle. The wheels of Aloha flight touched runway at Kahului Airport. The nose gear held. Skornsteimer applied the brakes. Mimi deployed the thrust reverser on their one remaining engine. The plane stopped. 94 people walked. Or were carried. Off that aircraft alive. Air crash investigator Greg Feith stood there and stared at the wreckage. He had investigated crashes his entire career. He had never seen anything like this. No airplane, he said quietly, has ever landed with this amount of damage. This was not an act of God. This was not bad luck. This was a choice. Made by people. Over years. That cost Clarabelle Lansing her life. The Boeing. Registration N. Had completed flight cycles. The second highest of any in the world at the time. Every short inter-island hop. Every single one of those flights meant the fuselage pressurizing and depressurizing. Inflating and deflating like a balloon. Expanding and contracting with every flight. Every day. For 19 years. Metal doesn't forget. Every cycle left microscopic cracks. A phenomenon called metal fatigue. Each crack too small to see. Each crack slightly larger than the last. The maintenance inspections had missed them. And here is the detail that will haunt you. A passenger noticed a crack near the door while boarding that very flight. They saw it. They thought about saying something. But they assumed someone else had already checked. So they said nothing. They sat down. They buckled up. And at feet. 19 years of invisible damage finally had enough. The investigation that followed Aloha flight sent shockwaves through aviation. Congress passed the Aviation Safety Research Act of. The FAA launched the National Aging Aircraft Program. Inspection requirements for older aircraft were tightened around the world. Airlines everywhere were forced to look harder. Check more carefully. Retire planes that had flown too long. Flight cost one life. And one airframe. But the changes it forced. The inspections it demanded. The standards it created. Have quietly saved thousands of lives in the decades since. People who flew home safely and never knew how close they came. Families who stayed whole because a broken plane in Hawaii changed everything. Clarabelle never knew any of this. She never got to see the world she helped change. Captain Robert Skornsteimer retired in. In interviews, he never boasted about the landing. He never called himself a hero. He just said. You really never totally get over it. First Officer Mimi Tompkins went on to become a captain. But the trauma of that day never fully left her. So she turned it into something. She helped develop a trauma support program for pilots who survive critical incidents. So that others wouldn't have to carry what she carried alone. That is her legacy from April. Michelle Honda. The woman who lost her shoes in the blast. And crawled the length of a broken plane. To hold her unconscious colleague's hand. She returned to work. She kept flying. She never stopped doing the job. Some people are just built differently. And Clarabelle Lansing, who gave years of her life to the passengers of Aloha Airlines, who loved flying, who loved her people, who was simply walking down the aisle doing her job, when the sky took her in. A memorial garden was opened in her honor at Honolulu International Airport. It is quiet there. Peaceful. Not far from the runways where she spent the best years of her life. She deserved more. She deserved to retire. She deserved to look back on those years and know she had mattered. She mattered. She mattered to every nervous passenger whose hand she held. To every child she made feel safe. To every person who stepped off a flight and thought, for just a moment, that wasn't so bad. That was Clarabelle. Here is what I want you to carry with you. The next time you board a plane, when you're half asleep, annoyed about the delay, barely noticing the person walking down the aisle toward you with a drink, look at them. Really look. Because that person has chosen a job that asks them to smile through turbulence, to stay calm when passengers panic, to be the steady presence in a metal tube hurtling through the sky. And sometimes, in the rarest, most terrible moments, they are asked to give everything. Clarabelle Lansing gave everything. She didn't choose to. She didn't get a moment to decide. 1 second she was handing someone a drink and smiling. And the next second she was gone. But she had spent years choosing. Every morning. Every flight. Every passenger. She had chosen this. You really never totally get over it. Skornsteimer said. Neither should we. This is the true story of Aloha Airlines flight. April. 1 life lost. Thousands saved. A woman the sky took. And a world that should never forget her name. Clarabelle C.B. Lansing.